Jazz Cabbage, there's some weird background noise coming from somebody.
That's me. Sorry.
No problem. Oh, you're doing some dabbing?
I was trying until I jazzed my finger, and now I got to clean it.
Ooh. That sounds like a medical condition. Speaking of medical conditions.
I forgot to mute. Sorry, I didn't realize we're online now.
Yep. So Rick Thompson and Mr. Hashbash start the show off today. We're going to get to a few things. Another one where I suppose not a whole lot was planned. We took a couple turns, and I suppose we can just be lucky that it's us here. And people should be happy with that. But I don't know. I just guess I did have a few things lined up, and we also might get David Radoy later on, and possibly Josh Covert later on too, to talk about some stuff. So I hope that goes down. I did see that, and I know we don't really talk about Michigan-based stuff, but obviously there's a lot of different things going on. That Senator Schumer was talking about getting a floor vote in the U.S. Senate, and at least specifically on banking and expungements. And the wording that he used, I should probably look it up, I thought was really interesting for the expungements. The criteria that he said. It could have just been, obviously it's a, it's a political scenario and he's on a platform and he has a friendly crowd. He could just be kind of politically giving them some candy. But let's see if I can find it, because I thought it was pretty cool how he said it. Yeah. Expungement of the records of all of those who suffered from the over-criminalization of marijuana.
But he's talking federally, of course, right?
He is talking federally. He's a U.S. senator, yep.
Yeah, I know of 2 people that have had federal marijuana crimes other than major smugglers. I just wonder how many people this is really going to affect. Well,
if we look at it for those people that were started off with the cannabis investigation and that became like the non-concern and they went for heavier charges for guns or something like that, that has happened on a federal level. And if they can, if we do that, as we've tried to encourage people to do that.
I just wonder, because like the Bobby Platshorns of the world and the, George Jungs of the world, that was a different era. That's not happening so much. It still happens. They still find thousands of pounds at the border. Are they talking that these truck drivers are going to not have a problem?
Just recently, right? There's
just
several thousand pounds in a truck coming in from Canada.
Yeah, in the tires. Yeah, in tires it was carrying. I mean, does that mean that that's not going to be such the crime that it shouldn't be? I mean, I feel like this is a lot of fluff talk from these guys. The banking thing, that I understand. They want to try to get a hold of that money. They want to be able to have access to who's doing what.
Well, banking is difficult. When you can do it, there's all these extra expenses for extra over auditing. And then it's also a stepping stone to the tax issues, the 280E issues that are
correct, which I think you have to fix at the same time
or shortly thereafter. If this can happen now and for some reason that can't happen, then we got to take this. I don't know what the barometer is or what's been discussed. Go ahead.
And the discussion of expungements is great, but what about popping people out of jail that are already in federal prison, like Danny Trevino, for
Yeah, and the wording leaves a lot of room.
Right.
Depends on how you look at that. That's what there was no specific thing. It was more political kind of to a friendly crowd. So,
I mean, I make the argument that if your initial warrant was for marijuana, then your crime should go away.
That's valid.
But that's very self-serving, because that's the only way I would get rid of my felonies.
It's the only reason that like somebody like Michael Thompson had such a stupidly long sentence.
Right. And I mean, less and you want to write the law properly, less than murder. So you serve a warrant, weed is the warrant. You don't find any bodies. you don't get to pick and choose the other things you find.
No victims.
You
You
know,
know, and Ryan was able to move through a lot of it and get some of the harsher stuff and the length of times waived ultimately by how he handled the system when he was in there. But his like parole scenario was akin to somebody that did something like murder or some kind of violent act or something like that. Really fucking ridiculous.
If you look at New York and Massachusetts right now, they are really pushing hard to criminalize unregulated marketplace activities. New York, especially with all of the pop-ups, it's a predictable outcome. When you pass a law that gives personal freedoms but doesn't establish a distribution network, distribution networks will establish themselves. Whether
And they've been going on for a long
Well,
time without much, like they like don't care in terms of a priority
Yeah.
level. That's happened. That's just over years, and now they're cracking down on them as part of
the other thing in New York is it was underground for so long. It wasn't in anybody's face. Now it's on every street corner. It's at every park. And I'm not going to say we because we're not the ones, but the weed community didn't do itself any service by popping up everywhere, by opening up every bodega selling weed now. They didn't help themselves on that one, unfortunately, even though it should be that way.
You know, in Michigan, we issued medical marijuana cards. And when we had, 500 unregistered or unregulated retail centers in the state prior to 2016, they were all checking cards. Most of them were checking cards. Okay. I'm not gonna make a claim for all 500, but that whole industry was predicated on servicing medical marijuana patients. In New York, there's no medical. It's anybody that walks through the door, push some kush on them.
It's true. Like, so we talk about low hanging fruit when there's been these trucks that have been designed to show up and distribute cannabis for a while. And they've been left alone and kind of established to some degree. And then they start cracking down. Yeah, those, you can do that. And those trucks will again after a while, after, there's so many people that have been, arrested and prosecuted or whatever. But the activity isn't going to go away. It just takes a different form.
The best part is the guys that started doing the trucks originally started doing CBD candies. And that's all they were doing. And it was completely legal. They couldn't be stopped. And then weed hit the market and, it's New York, man. Everybody gets on board.
Well, New York's had expectations that were not realized when it comes to licensing schemes. They had a lawsuit from a guy from Michigan who said, my criminal conviction in Michigan should qualify me for special discounted status in the state of New York. I don't think he's wrong. I know that New York State didn't write their law that way, but the dormant commerce clause was put into the lawsuit for that. So they've had some delays, no question. But the fact that those bodegas are so popular and that people are buying that off the shelf should pretty much tell them, leave this shit alone until you get an alternative.
Well, and what's worse, most of those bodegas were selling weed long before it was legal. Yeah. So they know that. And, you didn't lose the war. How about that? That should almost be our battle cry. You did not lose the war. You won. But we're going to change some things from this point forward.
Congratulate drugs for winning the war on drugs.
Well, it's just that it's almost like the government feels like, and we see it in law enforcement, they're looking for money now. Where are we going to get money now?
What it turned into, it seems like, even early on, like the social control and the revenue generation capabilities. It wasn't, about there's this evil, horrible stuff we really have to eliminate. It was, a horrible strategy if that was the point.
And instead of coming to us and saying, hey, how much could you get to us? How could you build an industry that could finance the schools, finance the roads? How could you? They didn't do that.
Well, remember with the medical marijuana law, the MMFLA, which passed by the legislature in 2016 here in Michigan, there was a program where a certain percentage of the taxable income, the tax that they collected, went to law enforcement, and they loved it. And when we wrote and then passed the adult use program, the MRTMA, we cut that shit out, right? First of all, we didn't support paying cops with cannabis cash. And second of all, we didn't support taxing medicine, which is what had been done by the legislature. But in exchange for that, even though they lost that revenue, now money goes directly into communities and counties from cannabis industry, which is great. Now, if those communities choose to use it to support their law enforcement officers,
so
totally
I agree.
cool.
And I just want to add to what you said, that there was a lot of things piggybacked off of the MMFLA for the MRTMA, and that was done to make transition easier, kind of, had some idealisms in there that weren't realized. But point being, as many things were used from it, that specifically in terms of funding for police, a percentage cut in for police, which was 5% of the MMFLA, was excluded. That was most definitely on purpose. So go ahead, Adam. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
Thank you.
Although you need to work on the facial hair. Adam and I got you beat there, Jamie. You're kind of you're more Game of Thrones, and we're more like Veep. We're more like The Crown. We're legit. So the reality is, though, that we've got some potential movement on the federal level. Here's what happens, though. Typically, when Schumer calls for a floor vote, that means he can't get a vote in committee.
Right.
Because normally it's a committee vote, and then it goes to the floor. I don't believe any of the marijuana bills have passed their committee votes. So if he's trying to bypass that, it's because he expects the committee will.
I think this is a
some of the stuff.
I think this is actually in the weird system there, kind of a pre-committee move where it's an informal whip, maybe, of like who's generally, if there's enough momentum to bring this through the committee hearing or something. Because the way the article is written, and I only say that just because of how the article was written, saying that they expect to do this floor count and then get it into a committee. I noticed that too. That was interesting how he's jumping right to a floor without this. So there might be
the committee when it's introduced, though. So that's weird.
Yep. So it could be a way to get it momentum, to demonstrate that that there's enough support to really hear this or something. I really don't know, but I noticed that when I read it. I don't follow the federal system that much.
Safe Banking Act has been introduced federally in the Senate and in the House this year. Most recently in the Senate, like less than a month ago, and in the House it was in March. So
it has bipartisan support by and large. Everybody kind of sees the. Go ahead.
It does, but the House of Representatives is in no way going to pass the Safe Banking Act because
this isn't on their radar. This type of shit.
Kevin McCarthy has already said he doesn't want to advance any cannabis legislation in advance of the 2024 electoral season. He's not going to do it. I'm part of another program that airs on Friday, and I've been able to interview Morgan Fox a couple times, who's the national normal lobbyist who works directly in Washington, D.C. and talks directly to the people who will be casting votes on this. And he's super skeptical about anything, even positive stuff coming out of the House of Representatives. So it's a 2-year legislative cycle in the feds, just like it is for us. If it passes the Senate early, I still don't think it has a chance to get through the House, which really sucks to have to say that because we really do need some federal relief here.
That would be the way it could change somebody's mind if it had momentum coming out of the Senate and there was bipartisan support and some other shit. It's possible, but we shouldn't be counting on that anyway. This is not going to be prioritized, even if people are kind of open to it.
What would be a good tool for us to use is polling data. If we, meaning the cannabis industry, because the cannabis community that Adam talks about really doesn't have resources behind it, but the cannabis industry does. If the cannabis industry paid for Ipsos polls or Monmouth polls or ABC polls to show that the people of the United States support this and that they would put their votes behind people who said yes for this, maybe we could change some minds. Because in my opinion, the money doesn't matter. It's all about getting the votes from the voters, especially in a year like 2024 when it's going to be a contested election, Republican versus Democrat, and the Republicans just got spanked so publicly, bare-assed, whacked in the last election. If they honestly thought they could gain some votes and respect from it, they might do something.
I've been favoring Democratic Party lately, particularly from the perspective of the cannabis issue, by and large, much more supportive and progressive. but a strong Republican Party, like a Republican Party based on what would be considered kind of the current, philosophical core approach, small government, etc. Man, that whole thing is just fallen apart and is not as definable as it once was, and it's not. I don't think it does any favors for anybody to have when we have a two-party system, for one of them to be in just such complete disarray. I'm not a huge fan of the Democratic Party. I'd like to see some check from the other party, but man, there's nothing there to count on right now.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and we see a lot of very important issues that'll be taking the stage, commanding the conversation in 2024. Ageism is part of it, but Ukraine's still going to be a big deal in 2024. The debt ceiling that they're going to try and patch up and fix will probably only be a 1-year patch, not a longer term patch as the Biden administration wants, which means there'll be another conversation about
the age thing is a big thing. It keeps on coming up, man. So the idea now, I believe, by the Democrats is that, there's positives to point to, that type of thing. They're not going to debate anybody during the primaries. They're going to say this is the only real choice, even if like Trump gets the nomination. By the way, he just got a guilty verdict today in his civil suit. I think it was about a $2 million judgment, somewhere in that.
Is that the E. Jean Carroll case?
Yes.
Yes.
The jury just got that. They must have come back so goddamn fast.
I think it was pretty straightforward. They didn't put up a defense. That was part of it. They didn't show up. So
Right.
I mean, that's
Joe Tacopina
just run roughshod over him. I'm sure.
Trump's attorney made a big case about how he thought that E. Jean Carroll had taken her story and ripped it from a Law and Order episode from 2012. But that's clearly not true, since there's people who were told about this incident prior to 2012. It was the weakest argument he could have come up with. So I'm not surprised that he failed to defend the president adequately on that.
There's not strong arguments in defense of many of the stuff coming down upon Trump. This type of thoroughness before an indictment, like any other person with this type of evidence would have been indicted and locked away and
long time
shit canned, a long time ago. By the time they're doing this is so incredibly tight that there's
the evidence they had was just. I mean, his own deposition was abominable. I mean,
I wouldn't have raped her. She wasn't my type. How about I wouldn't have?
So you can do that, yeah. For the last million years, it's been true, I guess.
And then he identifies her in a photograph, claiming it's his wife.
It's Marla.
And here's the problem.
So proving his case, not really.
His lawyers had seen that. His lawyers had seen that, and they still didn't settle the case. Nope. And listen, I'm a big fan of chaos, so I got a huge kick out of that case.
Well, you watch, there are two other things that are going on right now. The Georgia electors is still valid. It is still a real case where Donald Trump tried to influence the Georgia elections people to invalidate their results for the 2020 election and flip it over to him, but also the false electors case. This has ties right back to the Trump administration, where what the Trump people tried to do was to get various states have a bunch of people that were self-appointed elections officials to deny the results of the election in order to cast doubt upon it. That's a real crime. And they're cutting deals with people like they cut a deal with Rick Johnson, right? They're cutting deals with people to talk about who influenced them and who provided the paperwork. And the language of each one of these was so similar. It's clear they came from a single source.
In every single one of these cases, Trump's attempt to obstruct the investigations itself is a whole long list of felonies that he just accrued aside from the core thing that was being investigated in the first place.
And the evidence is there. There's no need to go looking for the evidence.
Here's what happens when you're an asshole. Here's what happens. People are happy to flip on you, right? So when they say, if you turn state's evidence, we won't charge you anything. He's like, fine, I got lots of shit to talk about with Donnie. I got a lot of stuff to tell you. And some of those people in that Mar-a-Lago documents case, these are people that were close to Trump. And they know that he ordered people to move the documents from room A to room B in order to confound the federal investigators that came there looking for them. And they know that. He's flat busted.
Well, and I to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if that whole documents thing was more sloppiness than anything, and he got caught being sloppy.
It's too extensive, man, and there were too many opportunities to correct it that were completely blown off even.
But I
give
think,
him that.
he's untouchable. I think he thought he was told they didn't have boxes. He said, I don't have boxes. I mean, and if I do, I was president of the United States, and it doesn't matter.
Have you ever seen a video of Donald Trump saying mine? Donald Trump holds up something. He says, they want me to turn this in, but this
is mine.
And with such vitriol, with such anger, that he honest and truly feels like those documents were his to keep, and any attempt to get them back was just Democrats fucking with him. He thought
there's still, as we all know, there's still a continuing solid core group of people that are on the Trump bandwagon throughout all of this and right now, and so that remains there. I don't get it, but that's a real thing.
This has also been a diversion away from the Bush family, I might add.
The Bush family.
Yeah, you can go back generations with the Bush family's involvement in this country, whether it be, as president or director of the CIA or what.
So are some things starting to get exposed about the Bush family, and some of this is smoke and mirrors to deflect for further?
I think there could be things about the Iraq war that might have been coming out at this point that we're not going to hear about because we got this type of crap to deal with for the last 4 years, 6 years.
There's an ongoing, question about a lot of stuff surrounding that whole time period, 9/11 and everything else too. So it's pretty intense shit.
The dealing of Saddam Hussein, who was our right hand man.
They tricked Powell into doing that presentation. The UN, and like he thought it was a real thing. He's pissed when he found out that it was a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, because he's an honorable man.
Yeah.
Or was. He's passed away now, I believe. But former General Colin Powell really was the only bright spot in that Bush administration. And because he was so insistent upon the existence of these weapons, I kind of bought into him because of him, not because of Bush.
And it's not like it's based on what we knew. It wasn't like something like that wasn't somewhat plausible or, based on our image of what was going on over there and stuff. So to hear that kind of fit right in.
Yep. Well, they certainly misled a lot of people. Rumsfeld was horrible. I mean, and Dick Cheney. Come on,
the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
I'm really concerned whenever we have people who were, for example, the senior Bush was the former head of the CIA prior to becoming vice president and then becoming president himself. I'm real concerned about black ops guys getting the key to the kingdom because what do? They continue to do the things that they've seen that work out for them over the years. They refund black ops things, they re-energize programs that were eliminated by legislative action, and they don't really reflect the American values. And then they make people hate us overseas, and that's generational. That takes years, decades to overcome the hatred of the United States that a lot of African as well as Arab states have.
I also think we're at a little bit of a different point where Americans around the world haven't been the savior for a long time, for many generations. So very few places are we looked upon as the great America. Most places we're looked at as some sort of oppressor. And, the World War II generation's gone.
It's difficult to imagine a scenario where we have a World War III where the United States and NATO allies go against Russia and China, perhaps, as well as Iran and other nations. It's difficult to see Latin America lining up to support the U.S. It's difficult to see Africa lining up to support the U.S. I mean, that's a lot of resources. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of important things. And we don't have a reputation in those places. And
the
those are
consequence
current
of strong arming or neglect versus trying to do something in harmony, or that I don't want to simplify it too much. I mean, I'm sure
well, we've
levels of
done
complexity, but
we've done a lot of bad things in Latin America and in Central America too, with the Reagan administration and the Nicaraguan death squads.
well, there's a reason why so many people want to get out of their country and come here.
Yeah, it's not like they're right.
We kind of helped out with some of those conditions. I would
Some of those ruling entities are really bad, and the situations in their home nations are terrible, where your people get kidnapped and gangs hold them, and the soldiers or the police won't help you. You have no choice but to pay off these guys. And what do these people have? Nothing. They're some of the most impoverished nations. It's just a shame. But again, when you have a legislature that's unwilling to spend money on international things because there's an isolationist trend towards certain people's belief system, you're not likely to get funds to be able to help out people other than extreme environmental circumstances like tsunamis or earthquake relief. We're pretty quick to jump on some of those, but to just help people, not so much. Of course, we have Americans that need the help too, or people at home that are not doing well. And some of the policies being put in place by the Trump administration and being pushed by the current legislature, especially in the House, really disfavor assistance to people who struggle and who need it.
it's okay because it's going to trickle down. You hook up the rich people. And,
yeah, I mean, but you're fucking with Medicare, you're fucking with Social Security,
and they blatantly fucking with or attempting to fuck with Social Security while saying at the same time, we're not going to do that. We're not going to touch it. We're not doing that. I can't believe that we'd be accused of that.
Yeah,
really bizarre shit.
Work requirements for Medicare really are not functional. They aren't. So there's so many different things going on. We have spent almost the first half hour talking about some of these national and international issues, and it's
don't usually hit that, but let it go.
Kind of cool. So we got a chance to talk about that. It's a little off topic for us, but it certainly is valid conversation for any American to have.
Yeah, we kind of have a little bit of a bent here, but if it's understanding there's political stuff there at the same time, kind of in the realm of the facts that we're familiar with, so it's not meant to be hurt anybody's sensibilities if you have a particular stance here, but
if we wait a few minutes, maybe some more legislators will be indicted.
I was going to ask Rick if you were aware of any further developments in the public corruption scandal, the FBI investigation, etc.
No, I'm not. But here's what I noticed as well. I did not see any news reporting on the fourth conviction. We know 4 people had pled guilty. There was supposed to be a conviction on Friday. We did not see any news reports about that. Whereas on the previous convictions, Delale, Johnson, and the other lobbyist.
So there's Brown and Pierce. Do you know which is which?
I believe Pierce is the one that was supposed to be convicted on Friday, and we did not hear any news about it. Maybe it was so unimportant that people didn't report on it. In the Detroit Free Press this weekend, M.L. Elric, who is the name of a very, very wise editor there, published an article or an op-ed that said anybody who was friends with Rick Johnson, you better be puckering your ass right now, baby, because he's promised to spin dirt on all criminal activity that he knows about, not just the stuff that's related to the cannabis industry, all criminal conduct.
I wondered about that.
Yep. I mean, they better have a bunch of stenographers because that guy knows a lot of shit. So the concern being that Mark Totten recently said there may or may not be additional convictions coming out of this investigation. And that makes me mad because there's so many other people beyond just these 4 that were involved in this whole scenario. Financiers, middlemen, people that crafted packs in order to take, fluff donations from these places. There were a lot of folks involved. And the fact that Skymint has said they've given up thousands of pages of documents to the investigators in the furtherance of this thing, that tells me there's thousands of pages of other people who did some bad shit who need to get punished. And the Michigan Cannabis Manufacturers Association was, dead in the center of all of that negotiation, talking to people. This, if you want something from Johnson, this is what you have to do to get it, facilitating those things. We know there were people doing bad things. And if you stop at these four, I'm going to feel like the whole scenario was a fail.
Well, how do you leave the licenses intact?
That's an excellent question.
There has to be some determinations probably confirmed, and then the state has to evaluate that. I would imagine under the framework that we have.
They're the only ones that can revoke a license is the Cannabis Regulatory Agency. Just some background for our viewers. The federal investigation revealed that falsehoods were said on documents that were submitted by licensees, including Green Peak, stating that they had no relationships with any licensee or anybody in the regulatory field, where in actuality they did have relationships with Rick Johnson through these other lobbyists. So the question becomes, if those medical marijuana licenses were obtained with false testimony, shouldn't they be revoked? The answer simply is yes. I'm not sure how many of those licenses are still in existence, but shouldn't that also invalidate the rest of their retail licenses too?
Yes.
If you obtained a medical license through fraud,
you shouldn't get anything.
You shouldn't get anything. Exactly, Adam.
Matter of fact, I'm going to tell you that they shouldn't have their licenses revoked. They should currently have their licenses suspended. Revocation.
Pending investigation. Yeah.
Right. Revocation can come later, because the reality is they should have to pay rent on their buildings. They should have to keep paying their employees, and they should have to suffer a little bit until the government figures out what they actually did.
Well, and the testimony that's been delivered is in a federal case. So, I mean, this comes from federal prosecutors. How unimpeachable does that look to the Cannabis Regulatory Agency? To me, it doesn't mean a whole lot, because I know agencies of law enforcement oftentimes fib, mislead,
Really?
overemphasize, or just flat out lie in order to do it. But if you needed proof in order to justify what you're doing, federal testimony is about as damn good as you can get. Good proof.
Well, and at some point, won't all this be foiable?
Federal stuff, not as much. And in Michigan, through the CRA, you can't FOIA anything related to applications, because all applications are private and eliminated from FOIA.
But their investigation that they're doing, how about that? Is that foiable?
I would think so. And there are several really good reporters on this story. Dustin Walsh is on this. Craig Mauger's on this. These are guys that have been around for a while and know how to get down to the truth. I really trust them as reporters. As long as their editorial staff gives them the leeway to pursue this story to the nth degree, I think we will get a lot more details out.
I've noticed MLive laying off on some exposure of some of these motherfuckers, And I remember also back during when Schuette was running for a second term, their endorsement of him, and that being largely controversial with many of us, and I think they backed off of doing that kind of stuff eventually.
And MLive has a restricted staff as far as people that are focused on just this issue. So even Gus Burns, who's typically the guy that reports for MLive on these issues, Gus has been given assignments in other areas too. So they're not just hyper-focused on us. So welcome.
Various reasons. Stacy joins us.
Various reasons.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on.
We were talking about some local or some current news stuff, and I caught the headlines of an article and got into it a little bit. I think I sent it to you, and I thought it was really interesting. OSHA they're saying there's such a lack of attention to labor conditions in this emerging market that OSHA is considering stepping in and creating things themselves, or alluded to something similar to that.
I hope so.
Right. So thank you so much for sending me that article. That was, it was definitely needed. This is a very good time to be talking about labor for sure. So yeah, the thing is, when I was doing my research for my website, cannabisworkersresource.com, I really realized that there's not a lot of states that have like their own OSHA, their own version of OSHA, right? Like we have MIOSHA, right? Michigan OSHA, but there's other states that don't. You have to go directly to national OSHA in order to file a complaint. So I've been doing some diving into looking at statistics as far as any data that's collected on cannabis workplace specific injuries, complaints that have to do with illnesses, things like that. And, you know, there is generally like a specific category that OSHA will have set up, right? Like, so you can go look up, I don't know, industrial injuries and industrial deaths, whatever, and then there's subcategories there. There's nothing for cannabis. There's nothing at all. And you know, we're this close to being a national industry. And you know, if I lived in, I can't think of a state that doesn't have their own version of OSHA off the top of my head, but let's say it's Minnesota, not saying it is. Let's say it's Minnesota, and you know, I'm working at a cultivation facility and I realize that there's a lot of health and safety violations. I have to take that directly to, you know, national OSHA. And if they have nobody to handle it, then what is going on with it, right?
Just to remind everyone, OSHA stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Those are the people that make sure we have safe workplaces and that workers' rights are being respected, or at least that's supposedly their mission.
Minimum standards, at least, right?
Yeah, right.
And
they do. They establish minimum standards, and they have inspectors that come out. OSHA inspectors are kind of feared among the industry. If you get an OSHA violation, they can really mess your life up if you're bad enough.
They're the ones that people look for when they work a job where MIOSHA or OSHA has impact, because they can shut you down in a heartbeat.
And MIOSHA being the Michigan in-state version of OSHA. Yes.
Right. So that, you know, that kind of begs the question that it would make sense that OSHA is taking or possibly taking the steps to, you know, really evaluate cannabis on its own because it needs it. It deserves it. I'll say it, you know, again, that the cart was put before the horse. There was no real research done on indoor growing of cannabis, a few studies, you know, particularly in Washington State. But other than that, we really don't have a ton. Now, there's a lot of research on hemp. And, you know, it's technically the same plant, you know, but it's just that hemp is like the federal term. Is that correct? Where it like, it's considered,
Yeah, well, it's
0.3%.
less than 0.3% and soon to be 1%. You know, THC levels typically grown outside though. So not, you know, some obviously labor conditions need to be paid attention to there, but not the indoor stuff that's probably a larger issue.
And there are different goals for growing hemp versus growing cannabis. Growing cannabis is all about production of flower, whereas growing hemp can be production of stock, production of seed. There are different industrial things you're trying to get off it. Go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say it's more about biomass when it comes to.
So the chemicals used, the procedures used, the policies used are different from hemp to cannabis, which is why I understand why people are studying hemp more than cannabis, because, you know, you don't really need DEA authorization to study hemp the way that you do for a THC-like product. But some of that information is going to not be valid. However, Stacy's point, I think, is that worker safety is compromised in a greater degree under indoor cultivation scenarios than we ever even understood. And we're just now trying to come to grips with exactly what happens to people when they spend all day long in this highly oxygenated airspace.
And it's interesting that a new industry comes along at this point in time when, you know, the corporatocracy has had time to kind of set in, and we actually have this mindset like labor is just another expense, you know, and not like a legitimate component of the total operation that needs to be specifically considered in a particular way that makes more humane and, you know, financial sense.
Right.
And so it has been like I went through the process, you know, as we all did here in Michigan as it went down, and I don't remember these discussions or big, you know, a lot of concern or a lot of attention toward those things at all. I didn't think about it.
Right. I just assumed that, oh, well, of course they're going to do that before, you know, they kind of start giving out licenses. I just honestly just assumed that the right thing was done. And that was, kind of a shitty pill to swallow.
Making sure there was water waste management, that the special fire marshal certification was there. There's some other safety things, but not that full on.
Certificate of occupancy is all they really ask you for,
Yeah.
and that's how you got your local authorization. Even Eagle here in Michigan, which is the Department of the Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, even they now, you'll see the CRA pushing hard Eagle regulations and regulators, because people open up cannabis farms without any idea of what they were going to do with the waste, or the highly fertilized waste water that they were going to have to get rid of when they swap out. And so Eagle's, now catching up to a problem that's several years in the making.
That the environmental aspect is the number one reason for raids in California.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
These
Well, water
huge
diversion.
And they have done people have done some shitty stuff, some really horrible, stupid
yeah,
practices that have caused issues. Not, again, when we're talking about these issues that are potentially of concern, indoor growing or of the type of activity that's taking place in places like California and stuff. It's not cannabis itself. It's like these practices surrounding
practices.
Exactly.
Other issue.
Exactly.
Right.
But to go back to the point of hemp as well, the studies that have been done on hemp and how it affects people in the workplace, even if it's outdoors, or even though it's outdoors, leads to what we're seeing now with indoor cannabis, right? It's the same thing. There's respiratory issues, ocular issues, dermal issues, right? Now, indoor, if you can see this outdoor where, you might be harvesting a few times a year or a couple times a year, sometimes you're harvesting every week in these cultivation facilities. At the place that I work, we harvested every week, once a week. And that is a lot. It really is a lot. You are surrounded by every stage of these plants. There's no getting away from it. And some of those crops will be moldy. If your body isn't even given time to heal, if you don't have proper PPE, then I guess it's more easier to see how quickly long-term illness can occur, and how you can succumb to it in a shorter period of time than maybe some other industries. We're just not there yet, right?
Yeah.
And we haven't spoken at all about the death at the facility in, I believe it was Massachusetts. Is that correct, Stacey?
Yep, Mount Holyoke. So True Leaf was the company that Lorna McMurray worked at, and so True Leaf ended up making the Dirty Dozen list for NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety, and they release a Dirty Dozen every year. True Leaf made that list for 2022. Her death was
This is all industry.
This is every industry in America. Yes. So this has
healthcare, automotive,
processing,
aerospace,
to cannabis, to construction, you name it. And True Leaf was the only cannabis company to make it. I'm not sure if they're the first, but it definitely was an interesting thing to see. So they released that, I believe it was 4/20. They came out with the Dirty Dozen list. It could have been the day prior, but they did have the mother of Lorna McMurray speak at the Massachusetts sort of reading of this Dirty Dozen, and it was a powerful speech. It was a very powerful speech. It really does. It's important to be looking at what's going on the East Coast right now. They're taking, because of her death, the Cannabis Control Commission of Massachusetts is taking worker safety and, within cultivation facilities, within processing facilities, a lot more seriously.
So we were examining it though before, and we were thinking, okay, this is pretty chintzy. You pay a little fine, but somebody died, and this type of stuff. But the ongoing effects and activity from this event is a lot bigger than we were imagining, and you're starting to see that show up. And I just want to point that out, that we were thinking this is really a lack of response for something so major, at one point.
Right. I mean, and I'm not sure about any other ongoing lawsuits. There's a lot more surrounding not that particular situation, but True Leaf in that particular area. The workers there that had to see that and had to experience their coworker dying. being rushed to the ambulance or being rushed to the hospital via ambulance, not once, but twice. That's pretty traumatic. If you read the article that was in the Nation, Mrs. McMurray speaks about how she got to the cultivation facility when she had found out that Lorna had collapsed, and the EMS were beating on her chest trying to revive her, and all she could say was, "Oh my God, please save my baby." And this is not what we're supposed to be seeing in the cannabis industry, right? At all. So when we look at this study, when it comes to hemp and the things that we already have. We have some research here in place. We also have, we're not reinventing the wheel when it comes to safety, or we shouldn't be. We know that masks are necessary and proper PPE is necessary within cultivation facilities, right? That's already there. And so you can see why there's, prima facie, the reason or the thinking that, hey, why do we need to, invent more legislation if we already have stuff in place that can protect these people? Maybe fit tested PPE, making sure that it's a sanitary environment, those kind of things. But if you don't have anybody from the state enforcing those things, and, this industry knows that, they're going to just say, well, screw it, and that's really what's happening, is that there's no reason for workers to not have certain PPE. There's no reason for, there not to be clothes to change into at work, right? As a nurse, you have to wear scrubs. You generally maybe have to change them in and out of work. Same thing with a cultivation facility. All these things should be standard. And until they are, we're just going to keep seeing the same shit happening over and over again.
And there are some generalized rules in regards to consumer worker safety and things, but you'll notice that individual industries, the iron industry, the auto industry, they all have their own individual set of regs because each individual industry is unique. Cannabis is unique in that way too. So we do need a commission to be able to be formed to write that. But again, it all comes back to schedule, right, Jamie Lowell? I mean, if we can't get it off Schedule 1, you can't get federal agencies to start doing studies on how we're going to allow people to do this. If you can't break that cycle, you're not going to be able to accomplish these useful things we keep talking about.
Yeah, the controlled substances thing is a barrier to a lot of common sense kind of approaches, to these issues in state and on a federal level. We're going to talk about it in state a little bit later on when David Rudoy joins us. But on a federal level, I think I've mentioned this before. There was the directive. The first time that happened, it was cool. It was kind of obviously political timing and stuff like that. Maybe not as genuine as we all would have liked, but there was a directive from the executive, from President Biden to the DOJ to examine the placement of cannabis on the controlled substances list and to offer a recommendation on should it be rescheduled, should it be descheduled, should it stay there, et cetera. They then enlisted the help of the health department, and I don't think they've got a good answer for it staying there. And some of the in what I remember reading it a few weeks ago, and again, I may have mentioned it already, was that there was going to be some public input to be part of their decision. And this is the health department looking at an issue with a set of facts, and then saying the feelings of the public are going to be considered in this decision. That's the weirdness that we have with cannabis. People don't approach this the same way as many other issues.
One of their biggest arguments to keep cannabis on Schedule 1 are international treaties that we have with other countries.
With the UN that we forced.
We forced.
Based on our stupid fucking policy, the catch 22 side.
I mean, you're used to America being hypocrites. Why can't we do it again?
Many of those countries are breaking that treaty anyways.
They should.
They don't give a fuck.
Yeah, they used to say that. Fuck you guys. You're going to do it.
Right.
So are we.
Well, and they want, because we don't have a federal program, they want the U.S. government to go in and stop state-based programs. How would you do that now? How would you even do that at this point? Can't. So.
And I know you said we were going to go into like the state-specific stuff in a bit, but how could the state, let's say like the CRA, could they use the money made off of taxes in order to fund a research, program to look into, I don't know, reverse engineering a cultivation facility to make it healthier or something?
And any change in expenditure has to go through the legislature. They can't change how they spend money based on administrative rules. It has to come from lawmakers.
Unless it was determined that it was necessary to run the department or something.
Well, that's already
that,
authorized, though. Yeah, those funds that are necessary to run the department are out there. That would be.
That's what I'm saying. That would be the exception of having to have it legal or legislation change. That or the other built-in roads, education, and local communities.
But that's not as unrealistic as it may sound, because if you came up with a bill that wanted to study whatever you just said, the funding could come from the CRA.
Well, the reference laboratory that the Cannabis Regulatory Agency is getting funding for, about $4 million. They're getting for the reference lab. That's coming through the budgetary process. Now, that's still approved by the legislature and then signed by the governor. So it's still through that pathway. But the budgetary process is less contentious than a single bill passing through committee and then a House vote and then committee and then a Senate vote and then a reconciliation vote and then passage to the budget bill is a whole lot easier. So
it requires an amendment with the 3/4 vote and all that kind of shit.
They can allocate money from the general fund towards a CRA to spend on certain things, no problem, like the reference lab. So if you were to convince the governor's office that was a wise expenditure of funds and that they should suggest to the lawmakers that they include $3 million a year for it, that might be the fastest path. Although it'd have to wait till 2025. Fiscal 2025, because we just voted on fiscal 20. Difference between fiscal years and real years is so stupid. But whatever they do whatever they want.
So I'm not sure if you guys saw, but the Teamsters had not the Teamsters themselves, but there were several dispensaries that are unionized over outside of Chicago through GTI, Green Thumb Industries, also operating as Rise. They were Rise dispensaries. And their contract was up for negotiation, and Rise was just not coming to the table. They asked the workers to, remove their Teamster buttons. And because of that, they decided to go on strike the eve of 4/20 and 4/19. And they were on strike for, I believe, 13 days. The company ended up erecting a 10-foot blackout fence around the property, specifically where the workers were striking at, in order to block the view from the road and also block the giant blow-up rat that they had, which is generally put out. So for everybody that doesn't know, when there is a strike, it really doesn't matter what industry. One of the things that sometimes will show up is a giant blow-up rat.
Yeah.
And, it's reference to scabs. Scabs are a term for people who decide to go and work for a company while their employees are on strike. So you cross the picket line and you go and you work at that company. And it can totally throw everything off. So, very anti-scab. So they put up these giant fences. It kind of blocked everything from the road. The bad press was very interesting, though. It was good to see. But after 13 days, Teamsters came out with a release. They said, hey, guess what? GTI has agreed to a 50% pay increase and a increase in benefits, pension, I believe, along those lines, as a part of, getting back to the bargaining table and getting workers, back to their jobs. And it sounded great, right? That would have put workers up at $25 or $24.75 an hour, et cetera, et cetera. But then the very next day, GTI comes out and they're like, oh, we said no such thing. We agreed to none of those things, nor did we pay anybody to cross the picket line. So now there's this kind of, well, are the workers getting something? What's happening? I haven't. I actually called the Teamsters and I got a call back today that I did not follow up with. But I tried to get a hold of several different numbers from GTI and there was no response there at all. I haven't received anything back yet from them, but this is an interesting thing to see. For the public release of, hey, these workers are going to be making a thriving wage to no, they're not. I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts on this entire situation might be.
You know, each one of those companies has to get reissued a license locally, maybe every year, every other year, based on what their locality describes. And if you told your city council that you were going to provide high wage jobs and you were going to keep people here and you were going to respect all these rules, and then you've had this very public problem, you might have a hard time getting relicensed by that board. You might.
It reminds me of when the remember when the Lions when the football union was on strike and the Lions did replace the team, or I mean all the teams, many of the teams replaced their teams with scabs, so to speak, or whatever. That was a really weird
Four
time.
stringers or something.
Yeah, just people that could play but weren't necessarily of that standard, that was asking for the bigger money. So that was a weird thing. What's going on with the? I know the efforts are slow, but they're kind of getting ramped up in Michigan a little bit. I mean, some companies are seeing the need just to try to figure out a good wage and benefit package to keep people around and retention without much extra influence. But we know that Loom and some other places are being looked at for like union organizing activities. Is there any update on any of that stuff?
So as far as I'm aware, when it comes to Loom, they are not really coming to the bargaining table, which isn't surprising. It's not surprising at all, to be honest with you. I think any of our, big single state operators, your Looms, your Skymints and stuff, have the capital and have the pull to, union bust, and they will. I don't know exactly. So I know that there were some protests. I'm not sure if they were legitimate strikes or not, at one or two Loom locations. And the protests were because, hey, these guys aren't coming to the table. We fairly came together. We fairly voted to say that we wanted to be represented by the UFCW or whatever unit it is. I believe it was UFCW, to come to the bargaining table, and Loom just isn't. They're just not doing it. And, that's sad to see, but it is, again, it's not surprising. There are not many consequences for a company or a business that union busts. You can file unfair labor practice, charges maybe, but there's, more nuanced things than that. But other than that, there really isn't much that is going to affect the business, like with OSHA, when Lorna McBurry died, their fine got dropped down to $14,592. Like,
what's interesting, and I'm sorry but what crosses my mind when you say that is we, as you know, did that kind of special version of Jazz Cabbage one night with the Sugar Law Firm, and we discussed the mechanisms by way people can organize and initiate these things. And it just, not, I guess, a total surprise in how things can be and are, but the fact that there's a mechanism to do it, but no teeth at all and able to see anything through is an obvious exposure of an issue here.
Right. I mean, labor reform is actually the bigger issue that we have here when we're looking at this. Right. And, obviously if the union that you're unionizing with has some pull, that can look different in, depending on where you are in the country. For instance, outside of Chicago or in the Chicago area, there is a much tougher union presence, and that tougher union presence ends up getting workers and, workers in general, a higher standard of, career path, as well as bringing in standards, like actual standards, good manufacturing practices. But yeah, it's a shitty situation to be in. If Now, when it comes to the smaller guys, I think that there's more, a lot more teeth there for them to bargain with the union and with the workers. So you're not bargaining with the union, you're bargaining with your staff. Like you're straight up bargaining with your staff. And to me, the looms and the GTIs are like, we don't even want to talk to you, but we still want you to come back through our doors and make sure that you're selling our product. That's bullshit. You know what I mean? So the smaller guys, there's a lot more things that are beneficial. There's a ton that is beneficial about unionizing, especially at this stage in the game in Michigan, like where the market is, where the industry is, which is just so like, oh, what are we juggling? There's a lot at question here, and especially when it comes to longevity. And unionizing can help with that, as far as, hey, now we're seeing places that are actively trying to unionize. In some areas they're union busting. Should your license be renewed if you're union busting? I mean, I think that that should be a serious consideration of if you're able to operate still in an area. If you are throwing $250,000 into union busting rather than improving your facility, paying your workers a few more dollars an hour, offering a pension, actually investing in training and really putting that money back in the community, what are we actually doing? It's just a bunch of rent seeking. In my opinion.
I remember having the discussion at a former place where I worked, and these things were being considered, and it was stated at that time that our full investment would stop if there was union organization at the company. So some people are motivated by the 250,000 is probably worth it in some circumstances. To them, I'm saying, and based on possibly getting cut off by investors.
Right. But like, where does that come from? Like, why is an investor, prior to anything even occurring, saying if a union comes in, we're pulling out?
Because the perception is that the union wages are going to drive costs up to the point where it's prohibitive to make a profit. And in an industry where such a huge profit margin was expected, and you're looking at such a tiny profit margin now, those particular people might take issue with an increase in wage and benefits. But my position is, fuck that guy, fuck those investors. They don't belong in our industry. If you're going to base your participation in our industry on paying the least amount of labor you can and offering no benefits to people and not caring that it's a revolving door, then I don't need you in my industry. Fuck out.
Yep, the desperate need for that flow to continue based on the difficulty of generating some revenue under these conditions decides us for some of these people. And I agree with Rick too. So what? It doesn't change the reality that we weren't thinking of people or the labor force in proper terms.
But we still have to give them respect. People still have to have a wage that they can count on. There needs to be some sort of an industry standard. Even if we don't mandate it, there still should be some kind of voluntary industry standard. Adam, I see you leaning forward, and I know you want to get in on this.
My whole concern is that the law just remains the same to the point that people stop getting arrested for this nonsense. The industry can have its infighting and its problems with labor and its problems with supply and all of that. But have we changed attitudes yet to where people aren't concerned about marijuana? I mean, it still seems to be an issue in a lot of places. And that doesn't help to show its safety, show that we don't need organizing. Why don't we need organizing? Because they have safe practices. Well, if they had safe practices, we wouldn't need this. I mean, it all goes hand in hand. We know that.
Exactly. And it's funny you bring up, not funny because we were just talking about it, but there are businesses that like overpromised, right? They said, hey, we're going to come into Marshall or whatever. I always use Marshall as hi, Anton.
What's up?
as the example, but they're like, hey, let's come in. We're going to come in your municipality, and we're going to create 400 jobs at our cultivation facility, between our cultivation facility and our processing facility, right? Well, that was maybe an overestimate of how many people you needed. Some places they actually need more people, and some places they need a little bit less. They just need to be higher skilled position. We really need to talk about like automating very unsafe positions and stuff too, bringing these things together. That can be a conversation for another day. But there is a place in Vassar. I was just reading an article.
Completely automated.
What's that?
It's completely automated.
Yeah. So there, I can't remember the name of them, but one of the guys at CEO or whatever, they said they're basing their manufacturing in this facility off of a Japanese manufacturing practice called Kaizen.
Yeah.
And it's like you're constantly making it more efficient, apparently. But the point, and they made this very obvious, that it's to keep the amount of manual labor and the amount of human labor as low as possible, because humans F up the process, right? The less hands on the product, the better. So they said, yeah, we're going to capture 1% of the market, with our first harvest, because we're going to harvest 3,800 plants at £1 a plant, and we're going to make this much money, and that's going to be 1% of the market. Boom. And it's like, I find that to be concerning, because you're only going to be employing 40 people in this area. Is this something that's really been like looked at or studied or tried before, like for manufacturing, and has it worked?
Yeah, this guy's done it before.
He has. Okay. And how has that worked?
If you'd like a tour, I can get you a tour.
Oh, really? Okay. I would love a tour.
This is a hell of a setup, and it's the future.
So
I gotta say though, if you have a growing scenario where you don't require any human input, that sounds great if you're launching a trip to Mars and you want to have some kind of agriculture there. But here on planet Earth, people actually have to have jobs.
This is minimal human contact in places where required.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So are those, like, let's say the 40 humans that are going to be employed there, are they going to be getting, like, is this going to be like extensive training, and they're going to be making like a real salary, like an upskill of labor, or are they going to keep things at $16.50 or whatever it might be? And now really, what are you doing?
I can't imagine they would do that. I mean, this is pretty high tech stuff.
At some point, though, you have to process plants. So I don't think the growing. Well, I read the article too, where they talked about basically they shut the doors, and then 4 months later they pop them open, and then they start to harvest. Right. So that was essentially how I took the article to mean still have to have people at the end game.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And he did this out in California, so he brought it here. He knows what he's doing.
Good deal.
It's real interesting. I've been waiting a long time to see this come to fruition. It's the future now. Does it require humans? Yeah. Will it require more humans than he probably thinks? Probably. But this guy's pretty smart, so he may have gotten it right. I'll tell you one thing. Humans will be smoking all that weed he grows.
Automation is cool too. I mean, and you're going to see probably more of it in the industry, but
yeah,
I wonder at what point, for me anyways, like growing a cannabis plant is like a form of art, right? So if I grow a plant and Rick grows a plant and Jamie grows a plant, you might get 3 different types of products out, right? And it's like, do you lose some of that artistic capability that comes out of having humans involved in growing the plant itself?
Art meets science.
I mean, Bud Light is automated too, and so every other beer is. You go to a distillery, it's automated, and it's good to create mass amounts of product. But do you lose that small batch touch? I don't know. I don't know.
The difference is you can take that recipe for Bud Light, let's say, and you can send it to any beer manufacturer in the world. and if they follow that recipe, they should come out with just about the same flavor. Water will make a difference, but just about the same flavor. The difference in the grows you mentioned is environment, and the three of you will not have the same environment. It's impossible.
Right.
Yep.
Or you could choose to harvest at different times, and that'll change.
Well, not only
just environment alone
Yep.
is going to change everything. And that's
And what level of maturity? Lots of things. Yeah.
that's the thing, that when people used to come into my grow shop with a piece of paper in someone's handwriting and say, I need to buy all this, I'm like, listen, you have to learn your environment. You can't do what your buddy told you to do, because what he does in his house is not going to work in your house.
And environment too, and we talk about environment, it's evolved to, it's not just humidity and temperature anymore. It's PPFDs. Is Rick using, a light that has higher PPFDs and maybe a different, more blue light than red light? I mean, it's learning that craft. And,
Right.
And that's kind of, I guess, like the artistic concept that I like. The science is the artwork itself, right?
Were hired and given big salaries for a reason, because their mastery of the craft made for a superior product outgoing, so the human factor, when you take that out, when you just let artificial intelligence run things, I think Anton's right. You do lose some of the potential for your harvest.
Except when the guy at the top is actually pretty good.
Well, if you locked in, so as we're saying, there's all these variables, and your specific environment will eventually be realized by this unique microclimatic conditions that it produces based on all these factors. And you've now gone through these different cycles and harvests to figure out how best to maximize how you want that type to be, and then you lock it in. That seems like it's like right. you still kind of combining those things to a degree. I don't know, possibly.
I'm really looking forward to this, because they can duplicate what they did. You can try and duplicate what you did, but they can duplicate what they did. So I'm looking forward to it. And
working from a successful model is much better. That's cool.
It's not a secret. He actually does Instagram lives on his grow and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool looking stuff.
Stacy made a point earlier, though, and we talked about it, but it might not have gotten the kind of traction that it deserves. Companies made promises to the local communities in order to secure favorable ordinances or to get their licensing, and some of those included employment statistics, and some of them included donations to charities and things like that. I would normally think that a city council would hold them to task on something like that, especially if it's a cultivation center, because that doesn't get you $50,000 a year from the CRA. Neither does a processing, neither does a transport. On a retail center, you could probably skate, having said the most crazy wild thing, because if they shut you down, they lose $50,000, and they're not likely to do that. But the other unprotected license types, I wonder how close city councils are going to call these people out.
Well, we're running into the problem of corruption all over the state. So how many of those city councils are afraid to step up because then they're going to be found out? And this was clearly shenanigans all over the place. And I think the local level is probably where some of the worst corruption has taken place. And I think
well, there's no question.
There's an article.
Yeah, there's no question. And and that just reminded me there.
Please go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, it just reminded me there was and I don't know what resulted, if anything, yet. There was an FBI investigation into the city of Inkster with local corruption investigation taking place, and I would like to find out where that stands. Because you just reminded me of it. Yeah, but we saw it unfold, whether or not there were investigations. We saw things unfold across the state and got an idea of. That's how I kind of learned by fire how some things actually work, as opposed to what you might imagine the process looking like if you didn't. I
imagine if we dug deeper, the quid pro quo level in the state when it came to cannabis licenses and literally anything cannabis I think it would probably be, it would be shocking, because what we've seen at the Rick Johnson level, I mean, that's pretty much the highest level that you can go right there.
Yeah.
And at the local level, these local governments have operated with impunity because the state hasn't done anything to hold them accountable. And it's kind of sad, because what do we do to fix it? Because now you don't have one state problem. You have however many cities have opted in, separate problems, hundreds of problems essentially, and who's gotten it right and who hasn't. And, I mean, that's why uniformity is important, and we haven't had that. And I don't know how we get there.
Well, I'm sorry to say that I think there's a lot of people quaking in their boots because the FBI is now on the case.
Well,
And they got nothing better to do than to look up these guys' skirts and see what they did, not just in the weed game, but, oh, this guy was elected twice.
Tee up some more home runs, man. Yeah.
the FBI is bringing their buddies too, the IRS, the DEA, and every other 3-letter agency, because they want a piece of that ass too. Everybody wants statistics at the end of the day. So if FBI can find a nice tax or a money laundering case or a tax evasion, which is rampant, because with 280E,
Right.
it almost creates an incentive to evade taxes. It's like a fly trap. You know what I mean? It invites that type of behavior. And by the federal government, but not doing anything about it, I mean, who knows?
You also have hundreds of individuals who said, I came from, and I'll be kind and use the term, the legacy market. Really? Where's your box of money? It ain't in your bank account.
There you go.
Now for your last 9 years of taxes, right? I mean, that's one of the things we were all really worried about when legacy market guys were trying to get into the MMFLA program to open up legitimate medical marijuana stores. They were very concerned that their, let's just call it poor record keeping,
and
for the last little bit of time was going to get exposed, and that's a big penalty.
And in my opinion, that's why you call it the black market, because they wouldn't expect you to keep records.
And anything that money bought,
phrase,
if you think, all that money that they took and tried to start legitimate businesses, at the end of the day, that all gets seized because it was bought with illegal drug proceeds. And now you're hurting the legal market because, well, I don't know, at this point, it's so oversaturated. I don't know if it's just going to correct itself, but it's craziness. And it took years to get to this point, right? It's taken years for this to unfold. And now is where I believe that the real industry, if you will, is going to launch, because all the people that were doing bullshit they haven't even come out yet. I mean, I can only imagine over the next, say, 6 months, what's going to come out after all of this. And is it ever going to correct itself?
You can say that, Anton, and I appreciate your perspective, but let's look at real history. There's never been an IRS case against a Michigan medical marijuana or unregulated market entity in the state of Michigan, and we had 500 of them statewide. There's never been one that's been publicly exposed, so it's not something that's gone on rampantly. I don't see the IRS really getting into it unless the FBI exposes something like you talked about. One thing leads to another, and then the IRS has a case. But all the people that participated in the unregulated market are essentially haven't been hassled by the feds at all regarding taxation.
I haven't heard of entities, like you say, but I have heard of owners within those entities getting audited pretty hard.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised about auditing some.
And that in and of itself, once they make those connections, but like you said, who knows? That the whole point is they don't want us to know, and that's how the game works.
That's how fear works, right? We're going to come get you. I can't tell you when, but you can expect us to get you. That's how fear works. They successfully wielded that club for many, many years.
100%.
Yeah.
Over a plant.
Yeah. It's silly.
No longer over a plant. Now it's doing bad business. Now it's cheating the government. Now it's everything they ever hoped for.
Yep. It's not necessarily about cannabis at this point.
Nope.
What I think, and here's the issue that I don't want to happen, is I don't want cannabis to get the bad rap, or the good business owners to get folded in with all the bullshit, because then they just say, you see, these weed people came in and just pillaged the whole thing. And that is what I hope it has. It's not necessarily about cannabis. It's about shitty people doing shitty things. These were people, had they been selling flowers, if
Well,
they were illegal, which technically they were,
Well,
you know
shitty
what I
things
mean?
happening right now are
Right.
happening by non-cannabis people, by the businessmen coming into the industry to take advantage of people, like investors that we heard earlier on the show saying, if you put unionization in it, I'm going to pull my
I'm out.
money out of your business. You know, those are the bad apples. Those aren't the weed people. Those are the non-weed people.
The interesting
Right.
thing,
And there's a big thing to say when it comes to unionization. And like, so let's say, I work at a dispensary and, me and my coworkers decide to unionize. We vote yes. Right now we go to the bargaining table. They want to prevent that at all costs, because once you're at the bargaining table, there's a lot of things that can happen. But, when you're asking for more money and the company says we don't have it, at a certain point, you might have to show your books. And I think that these big guys,
They don't want to do
a lot
that.
of people in this industry, don't get me wrong, but like, especially the big boys, 250K ain't shit to them, because if
Right.
they're like, we have to open up our books and shit, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because at that point, I think there will be a lot more investigations. And I think that's also why in the cannabis industry, unionization is being fought so hard, is because there are these other elements that come into play that, force the hand of the business to expose themselves in certain ways that financially, I don't think it will behoove their goals.
this is the perfect example right here. This whole experiment, if we call it that, is that the normal corporations who are doing shitty things have been protected. They're protected via bankruptcy. The system was set up to protect those folks. And these guys don't have any of those protections. So it's almost like the grossness of what they're doing is accentuated because they have none of those protections.
We're the victim of an apartheid state, in a way. We're the bad guys. No matter what we do, they tax us. They treat us like second-class citizens. Even when they're giving us what we deserve, we're still treated like second-class citizens. It hasn't gone away yet. And I've said it before, we're a generation and a half of die-off before people go, what? I'm waiting for the day when they laugh that they taxed weed at 20%, at 5%. You taxed weed? Are you kidding? What was wrong with those people?
We have people right now saying, I can't believe weed was ever illegal. Adam, you make the point on a lot of our shows that people have grown up and have become adults in states where they've always had access to legalized cannabis in a medical or an adult use way. That's a generational change. Those are the type of things time has to pass. But there are a lot of people that just need to die off before we get some proper thinking.
It's unfortunate to say it that way, but the legislature is a little different because they see it as taxation. They see it as a way to make money. It's a cash cow for them. It's a casino. It prints money. We all used to talk about how money didn't get printed. It grew on trees because we knew. And now they know. And they're coming for our money. That's all.
Well, and we're not learning too. Look at New York. They're a mess.
And they're keeping tax rates down relatively low in some of these new states. Delaware, for example, you're looking at a 10% tax, very similar to what we have. So I think maybe the message is out there that if you want to recruit people from the unregulated market, you have to keep the prices down.
Colorado had to go back and change their original approach because it didn't work because of the too high taxes. Go ahead, Adam.
Could you imagine inventing shampoo and being told that there's a 15% tax on your product if you bring it to market? I mean, That's what's happened to us. And it's not even the same everywhere you go.
When the green tax was, go ahead, Adam.
Well, that's what's really crazy about it, is that the federal government wants their little piece to add on to the state piece, which is going to make taxes completely outrageous in some places.
You know, when we talk about the green tax, and the green tax is more than just a lack of 280E. It's also extra fees on banking situations. It's also extra money that has to be spent in order to get ordinances passed to allow your place. And they put you through additional inspections that your industry really doesn't require, but they're going to make you pay for it anyway. And planning and zoning is extra expensive. There are so many ways in which our industry sees additional costs in order to operate.
And within our industry, because we have zones in the state of Michigan, so every zone has its own inspector, and they treat people differently within different zones. I kid you not, I've told this story before, but at the Oz in Ypsilanti, which used to be Third Coast, they were required to put in, you know, those little tape things that show you how tall the bad guy is that just robbed you. Well, they were forced to put one in with a camera. And they're the only dispensary in the state that was forced to do that. And it's the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard. I mean, it just makes no sense. But their inspector wanted it. So they had to put it in.
Come up to Macomb Township. They used the damn building inspector like a... don't even get me started with those folks. They're so hostile about it. Yet we have a big veteran population here in Macomb Township. And, you know, even I live in a very conservative neighborhood with doctors, prosecutors, the whole deal. And I talk to those folks and you don't get the pushback. You don't get the boogeyman, you know, they support it, especially when it's helping people who are sick and helping veterans. And yet the township is so adverse to it. And again, that's when I go back to, what were you promised to not opt in, right? And it always goes back to not what the people necessarily want, but what the big interests and what the lobbyists and what they're pushing. And law enforcement, especially.
They love to listen to their law enforcement. And one, not to interrupt you anytime,
no.
One of the things that really has always bothered me is that the National Association for Sheriffs Chiefs Sheriffs, the Chiefs of Police Association, the Fire Department, the Fire Chiefs Association, they're all anti-weed. Now, if you talk to their membership, they're all pro-weed. But if you talk to the fire guy, he's going to tell you that there's 41 fires a year from grow rooms and they shouldn't be allowed. You talk to these other clowns, and they're going to tell you similar national statistics that the association pushes, but the guy on the street doesn't see, because it's just using that, and I hate to say badge, but it's using that authority figure type to make a statement. Just like
same thing with Detroit and the churches, though, right, Adam?
Correct.
I mean, the churches are so powerful in Detroit, and their membership smokes the fuck out of cannabis, but their leadership insists on slowing down the wheel.
But worse than that, the black preachers that control Detroit have a constituency that does not live in the city of Detroit. The church may be in the city of Detroit, but the constituency, for the most part, lives in the suburbs. And that's been a problem for a long time. So, because these guys do exactly what the MCMA did. They show up and they say, we represent the people of the city of Detroit, our big churches. You know, our 10, 20,000 member churches.
It's a vocal minority that has a lot of weight.
They do.
And it's used. We saw it in different scale in Ypsilanti. Rick's been to meetings there with me where we've seen that whole strategy play out.
I've always tell people I am living proof positive that their whole theory was bullshit. Why is that? I was federal law enforcement. I was also a medical cannabis patient and used cannabis they just didn't know about it, right? And I was promoted and I was patted on the back and I did my job without issues. And then the second they found out I was a medical cannabis patient, I was the fucking boogeyman, right? And I always tell people that's proof positive. I did the job. You trusted me. It worked. You just didn't know about it, right? So to say that it's somehow dangerous, or that having a firearm and being a cannabis patient is dangerous, or that it causes people to be violent. I was the fucking gun police. I was the guy, right? I was the guy who did gun enforcement. And again, I was promoted, and I was, I did my job. So I used that experience as a way to counteract the people who spew that bullshit, mainly law enforcement. There's no law enforcement officer out there that can argue with me on that.
I constantly ask law enforcement officers if I should be entitled to be armed and possess a weapon, knowing who I am or speaking to me. Should my crimes really keep me from being able to defend my family? And they can't come up with a real reason other than, well, the law just doesn't allow it.
Technically, you can apply to the ATF for relief.
And
you know what? It's never going to happen. There is a process. There's a process. Apply.
Anton, I've researched that. Let me tell you something interesting. There is a process. They don't fund it in the budget. So the forms aren't even printed.
Exactly.
It's totally impossible to get your federal gun rights back, even though the law requires it.
Enforce our own rules.
It's the tax stamp. Sure, you can grow weed if you have a tax stamp. We're just not going to print the tax stamp.
We laughing and smiling because it's government, and we expect this kind of fucking from government.
Draconian.
Adam, you're on mute.
Fuckery. And if I had to, when it comes to law enforcement, why is that such a bone with them? I contend, having done the job, a lot of it goes back to revenue. Cannabis arrests generate revenue. When you seize things, when you go into that grow room and you seize $60,000 worth of grow equipment, and you seize a couple of cars, and then you sell those cars, and then you can take that money and you can split it with your buddies at the local level, and you can maybe hire an officer or two. Or the drug dogs, that's a perfect example. Why are they so pushy about the drug dogs? Those drug dogs, I've watched drug dogs just get bored and just start hitting on cars because they're bored, right? So they're not the tool. They're a useful tool because they want to get into that car, right? And they do good work, but the reality is they're grasping at every straw that they can to create an argument. But really, when it goes back to at the leadership level, it's revenue, it's case generation. I mean, if a third of your cases are cannabis related, and now you don't have those statistics to show, now you're not doing the amount of work that you used to be doing. So when you want to justify your budget, they're not going to give you as much money because you're not doing as much work, is what it comes down to.
And I argue if they'd have asked for a payoff, we'd have given it to them a long time ago. Okay, listen, this is no joke. There were 285 illegal dispensaries in the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit puts up ballot measure N. It was asking for $250 million. Why don't you just tax each one of these dispensaries $1 million? There's your 250. You're all set. But, reality and common sense will never go together.
Before we bring David Rudoy in, I just want to make a point about something. While we were on the broadcast today, I received an email from the law offices of Barton Morris, who's a wonderful person, been on the show before. The title of it is Prevent the Collapse of Your Business Today, which is very scary. And it's a guidebook to how to avoid the collapse of your cannabis business today. When we're going in that direction, when we have that kind of a focus, that's frightening, right? And we know that it's a turbulent entity right now. It's the whole industry is very rough and tumble. But wow, I just thought that was worth mentioning as a conversation piece, because to set up a whole guidebook, that's pretty amazing. Welcome, David, father of Levi.
What's up, guys?
What's happening?
What's up?
Not much. Glad to be here. And
David Rudoy, law and Turple Gang in the industry, great cannabis brand. People talk about the quality in the commercial system not being as high, and that's probably true overall, but there are examples that are worthy. And
I'd like to believe that caregiver roots is what leads to higher quality.
yeah. And you got a group of people that did it before, yep, and scaling up, and some people have been able to figure that out. And the Turple Gang speaks for itself. People haven't checked out the product, you know.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have some victims of the drug war as fellow owners. It makes us a better company now, but they had to do some time in the past.
Yeah. You know, and Josh Covert, CEO of Meds Cafe, you know, longtime attorney in the field, just took a case pro bono, which he'll do from time to time, just to help people out. And there's people are still getting charged for felonies for minor cannabis activity. It's not as much, but it's still going on. There's other issues that are linger on. Some people have been able to get their license back. I know you worked with Chad Barrow quite a bit, as did a few other attorneys during his journey. And finally, you know, Secretary of State starts giving back a license, but should never have been that big of a fucking deal over just, you know, being a medical cannabis patient, actually, or, you know, or whatever.
Well, the craziest thing is with Chad, and I don't think you would mind me saying it, their issue wasn't with him using cannabis.
It's going to remain a mystery and a cliffhanger until we can get him back.
The issue was his friendship with Jamie Lowell. That was
You have to end that completely, or else there's no chance you're getting back on the road.
Hey, sorry about that.
That's okay.
The issue with Chad was he got charged for running a dispensary that he believed was legal and approved by, you know, they went to the city of Gaylord and had a voter initiative and got it approved for zoning for dispensaries, and everybody was up there operating. And, you know, there were hundreds of dispensaries around the state at the time. And then he ended up taking a plea in that case that had nothing to do with cannabis use. And they were using that to deny the guy the ability to drive anywhere, which is absolutely bananas. But yeah. And I would just say, I have 4 cases. It used to be like 40, but I have 4 cases right now where people are being charged for growing cannabis, not selling, growing cannabis.
That's the one that Josh took to, was just growing. Go ahead, Adam.
I just want to know how they get to these people. I mean, where, how do they get to the point where they're able to either pull the warrant and show
I know
up?
about Josh's case, but I don't know about obviously David.
I mean, I can tell you the number one. Here's the number one reason. You pay somebody to come help you trim your plants or something, and then there's an issue with that person for whatever reason, like they were stealing your weed in one of my cases, and then they fire them, and then that person goes to the cops.
Right.
And then one guy thought.
And in Josh's case, it was a.
Go ahead, Jamie. Sorry.
No, it was just their partner was splitting and was angry and let the cops.
These are all snitch cases, right?
Yeah.
Because the government doesn't care. The government doesn't.
They don't have a reason to go check it out otherwise, unless they have somebody say something, probably.
And there's also a good amount of, people that believe it's 100% legal. And so they're going on Facebook and talking about what they're doing and showing pictures of their grow rooms because we legalized it, and they might not be following the rules perfectly, but they think they are. So they're putting it out there for the world. And then there's some asshole, who feels the need to go to the cops because they don't like that person because of their Facebook personality or whatever. That's been most of my cases. And then I had one. I have one currently going on where it's like they raided a place 2 years ago, and those guys took their plants out, and the landlord looked for another grower. So I started growing there, and they basically just used the old like the fact that there was something there before to get in again. I'll be getting that case dismissed very soon, but
But you should never had to go through a hassle. Did they take anything? Did they destroy stuff? Did they shut it down? That kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, they took all his stuff. They they took all the plants. They killed all the plants. They charged him. They went to his house. They raided his house. Fucked his house up. Took all his computers. Took all his phones.
Just like the old days, David. Just like the old days, right?
It's just like the old days. And there's a few prosecutors out there that are choosing to prosecute these cases. And I'm just walking into court kind of flabbergasted and laughing at them. They don't understand the law. I had to explain section 15(4) that you can't charge felonies for this, guys. And they're like, no, I don't agree. I'm like, did you read it? And then they read it. And I'm like, explain to me why you don't agree.
There's plain language that it's a misdemeanor, barring habitual. There's a whole list,
So here's the problem. Now that we look back after a couple of years, of course, I thought the MRTMA was really good, well written in that area. But things like smoking cannabis outside and growing cannabis outside, not under the proper rules, are in section 4. Section 15 says, except for violations of section 4, this is the exclusive list of penalties. So prosecutors, I had one case up north where they were growing outside. They were within their plant count, but not growing outside properly. And they said, well, that's section 4. So it reverts back to the public health code.
So that's what we want to talk about. Exactly. Perfect segue. Because all these things that we kind of just touched on leading up to this has to do with the continued inappropriate placement of cannabis on our state's controlled substances list.
Exactly.
And we've been working on this for a long time. And just a little background, there was a case with Cannabis Council, Comorian Law. They had John Sinclair and Josie Scott, amidst others, as plaintiffs. This was just under the medical law too, to argue that we should be taken off the list. It got kicked due to technical reasons because there wasn't standing. The people that are now clients of Michael's and David's and Josh's are the potential people with legitimate standing now because it wasn't addressed, and all those other issues continue to be a problem. So we talked to legislators, will you do this? And up to 3 sessions ago, and immediately the response was, oh, that's a no-brainer. Yeah, of course. Yeah, we legalize it. No, that kind of stuff. And then we start getting into it, and you start seeing the real pushback by the LSB and other people kind of jumping onto this idea. Well, you have to change all these other laws, and you don't really have to. For example, when the abortion law was changed, they changed the main part of the law, and all the other accompanying laws that could be that are still in the books that could be pointed to are now worthless because the guts were taken out of the enforcement ability. So it's the same thing that we're talking about doing with this. Yet we get pushback for these stupid fucking reasons. Go ahead, Adam.
Well, no, that's the thing, is that I would think that once they change the scheduling of the substance marijuana or cannabis, whatever you want to call it, that any law or rule applying to it would
it dies because it no longer is connected to the code that Dave was talking about. And so we continue to encourage this introduction of this law so we could do it early on, understanding that we'd have to spend some time to educate people on it. And there was just a lot of pushback and a lot of concern over, well, now it does this, it doesn't cover this, doesn't cover that, all those things. And these are by people who should know better, by the way. These are staffers, these are LSB people that, they were things already covered in the subsequent laws. They're like, oh no, what's going to happen if somebody gets on a school bus with a bunch of it? Well, it's against the law in these subsequent laws. So they can't do it.
And also, it's not a fucking bomb.
Yeah, and it's just cannabis at the same time too. That's the same thing that we're talking about. Yeah.
You mean the thing that's never killed anybody in the history of human, 50,000 years of cannabis smoking?
So I was lucky to get David and a few others to come on some of these meetings eventually, because I felt like we needed that kind of credibility, the type of legal analysis he could provide that they would, probably more likely believe was a bigger issue than me saying it or something. And it was very helpful. So I know that he's very in tune with this.
Unfortunately, I think that have a better chance of, now that we actually have some standing, getting there through the court system than we do getting there through our legislatures. Although we do
But the attorney general says, and the whole time we're asking her, just don't fight this case. Let's let it win and let's get this thing knocked off. And she said, well, I'm going to fight it on these technical grounds. I'd like to see it done legislatively, and I'll support that. So we're kind of hoping that there was some momentum with that, and we could take care of it. But you're right. Now more people are becoming real plaintiffs. The issue of standing is no longer going to be an issue for the next.
Here's
round.
the only problem. To get that kind of sweeping change, I got to get to the Court of Appeals. Unfortunately, I've had probably 15 cases in the last year concerning cannabis growing and that sort of thing. And I've gotten them all dismissed on other grounds, like illegal searches and everything
so
else.
Not being fought to that.
Nothing gets to the Court of Appeals.
Right.
Yeah, or they offer the $100 civil infraction that my clients are going to take instead of paying me, however much money to take it up to the
for
Court
a principal
of
to
Appeals.
go fight it and get the court ruling. Yeah.
David, I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So when we talk about, getting all these cases dismissed and prosecutors not understanding the law, why aren't there more Bivens suits out there? I mean, I know Bivens suits are the one thing that those folks actually fear because, qualified immunity doesn't really apply at that point. If they don't understand the law, clearly the warrants that they're supporting, would be violation, the Fourth Amendment. And that wouldn't, why aren't we seeing more of that type of stuff?
We're gonna.
Good.
We're
Sue the shit out of them. Bivens suits scare those people.
It's going to happen. The reason is because basically because the cases are oftentimes settling in the way that I'm saying, where with really the right way, which is if you're growing cannabis outside of the parameters, or you have 70 plants and you're supposed to have 12 or whatever, and you get $100 civil infraction fine. That's what the MRTMA said is supposed to happen, is we're settling with kind of a fair resolution.
Or a misdemeanor if it wasn't
case,
habitual, or for remuneration and some other stuff.
Yeah, but not a felony. I haven't pled anybody guilty to a crime yet. I try to keep it all civil infractions, pay a fine. Most of the time my people were violating the MRTMA to some slight degree, and $100 fine I think is a fair outcome.
But it's also the loss of plants too, David, right? It's not just $100. They also had all their plants chopped in most cases, true?
Not in all cases, but a lot. So a lot of cops, what they're doing, which I guess is better than chopping everything, is they're chopping their plants that are above their count. So putting them into compliance.
That's better.
But this case that I have right now up in Sanilac County, this one is really ripe for a 1983 lawsuit. This one's really ripe for a good lawsuit because they chopped everything. They busted in his house. This one was more, feels like we're back in 2016, where they just tore up the apartment, took everything, took all, where they're really going in, full speed, and they literally have no idea about the law. And here's the thing about that one too, is they had knowledge of cards and compliance. And I'm going to win this case in court, and then I'm going to sue them. And the prosecutor's not smart enough to realize that he better offer me something good soon, because once the client gets invested, but it's very ripe for a lot of lawsuits. The issue, Anton, is time. So first we have to win the criminal case. Then the lawsuit, they have to meet with their lawyers. There's a multi-year statute of limitations. Then this lawsuit gets going, and it takes time for this stuff to move its way through the system. I'm still working on a civil suit from a case I won back in 2016. And we're still kind of in the middle of the case. So you are going to start to see this stuff more and more. But lawyers need to start advising their clients. I think there's a lot of lawyers out there that don't understand
There was
marijuana law.
A lab report that came back from the forensic lab to a case that Michael's involved with that omitted the spot for controlled substance number for cannabis. And he asked them, and this is in, with testimony, how come this was left off? Well, it's not a controlled substance anymore. We legalized it in the state. And he's like, oh, really? Okay, Judge, I guess we're, nothing to do here, right? So let's
go home.
Let's go. And then, of course, the prosecutor's like, yes, it's still there. It's still there. They show it, So there's the basis of of a plaintiff being created.
Yeah, I mean, it's time. I think we need to hit it by the courts. I think we do need to keep working on the legislature because I don't have any faith in the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court to do the right thing and knock it off the controlled substances list. You know, like they did in the Sinclair case for a period of time, but it's been, 60 or 50 something years since that seminal case, and I don't, but I do think probably the faster way to get there is through the court system. Me and Michael have been talking a lot about refiling cases now that our clients have standing. Every case I've filed such a motion in front of, the judge has granted, which means we don't get to the Court of Appeals. I just have these circuit court opinions, which, by the way, if there's any lawyers listening and you need some circuit court opinions, I have them, citing that, there's no felonies under the MRTMA. There's no felonies for marijuana. So I have gotten some good judges to take the right position, but eventually we got to find that right case and get it fixed. Because although we have the Democratic legislature for the first time in my memory, I don't think we can count on Democrats any more than Republicans to do the right thing. Unfortunately, they're still
This
part
isn't
of the
this is stuff isn't
party.
priority for sure. I've been told under no uncertain terms. We have to create this
for
to
me,
be a thing.
Democrats and Republicans both have been the problem from the start. So it's the drug war has been, if you're part of the political party of being a politician, it means you're probably not going to help us.
Right.
So
we're still working on it from that angle, though, to push it, to help get the word out, to help create perspective, if nothing else. And we'll continue to do so. And some people are more understanding than others. But I agree with you. Now there's a lot more, in that case that we were talking about, that loss on standing, just the MMA, not even, it was pre-MRTMA, which alone adds more fuel to the whole argument. And now there are people who have actually been hurt because of the continued connection.
David, do you, in the cases that you are, when you say people are snitching somebody out for trimming or whatever the case may be, it's usually people's mouths that get them into trouble, right? The cops knock on the door, they start asking questions, they say something, and they can't just possibly just be showing up with warrants. How are they securing access? Are they just pencil whipping warrants out there?
So here's the thing about our country or our state, but a warrant is just a piece of paper that a cop convinced a former prosecutor most times to sign, right? So I still have, like the case that I was talking about in Sanilac County, literally they got a warrant based off, we raided this place a couple of years ago and they were out of compliance, which isn't even true. They're still fighting that case. 2, there's lights on and high electricity bills. That's it. That was enough to get a warrant in the state of Michigan, where marijuana is legal and it is legal to grow marijuana. So it's crazy. I mean, you have to keep in mind that a magistrate is just a lawyer who's usually a former prosecutor that got hired by the court to work part-time. They're not like some well-educated judge on marijuana law. They probably have never read the Michigan, the Regulate and Tax Marijuana Act. So that's what we're dealing with.
Ignorance. Yep. Well, he might have said while he was here, but Adam keeps on saying we need another generation of die-off before the
more
awareness is thorough enough to view something like that a little bit more coherently or rationally, instead of the old school thinking without any attention to the changes that are taking place.
Yeah. I think that in a few years here, as it gets more and more normalized, more lawyers are going to be like, what are we doing? But I mean, that's literally when I walk into court the first time with these prosecutors. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, why are we still here? I thought I legalized this. I'm tired of fighting. I actually love fighting marijuana cases because I win them all the time and it's fun. Right. But the fact that my clients have to go through all of it is crazy. And I just can't believe that we're still doing this. Just give them a fine. If you think they're causing a nuisance, sue them. There's already statutes for nuisance. If you really hate the smell of weed that much, you know, there's a nuisance statute. It's civil. We don't need to be charging people criminally. If they're creating ordinance violations and with their illegal electrical work that's causing fires and transformers to blow up, then they need to work on it. You know, they need to get them into compliance, but the proper process is not charge them with felonies.
I agree.
But hopefully we get to the right place soon, but we do need to stay on it. I think we need to be hitting on both fronts.
I agree, because it gets the word out regardless, and people should be more aware of like how ridiculous this remains.
Yeah.
So we kind of closing in a little bit toward 6 o'clock and ending. Is there anything you want to make sure that you get in on this conversation, David, or just certainly a recap on the angle of the importance of descheduling a little bit in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's really important to the listeners of the show, who, if you are getting in trouble, you need to make sure that you hire an attorney who understands that's not going to plead you out, that understands how to understands this law, understands how to fight this case, hopefully as part of my network, and the attorneys that watch this show, we need to be challenging the scheduling. What Matt and Michael Comorn did with that past lawsuit should have won, but they dismissed it on lack of standing. So we need to search for that right case. So, if you've already hired another lawyer and you're listening, tell that lawyer to contact me, please, if you have an ongoing case. We got to kind of scour, because we do want to find that right case, if possible. I mean, any case would be good, but the right case would be
You want
better.
to tee up a home run as much as possible and have it go
yeah.
through the system with less baggage to have to consider or wade through and
Exactly.
that type of stuff. So that is awesome. And then, of course, just to slip in again, Turple Gang in the regulated system, some caregivers who have scaled up, and it's really good product, and it's at Meds Cafe amidst many other places.
Yep,
Rudoy
that's
Law.
Cafe.
Mhm.
Yeah, Rudoy Law. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Right on, man. And welcome to stick around till the end with us, though. Of course, just got a couple of minutes left. It's up to you. But Stacy joined us also, kind of came on during the show. I was really happy you were available. I know that we had that OSHA stuff to discuss and just a general update on this thing. That's an important issue and always interesting. So anything else you want to make sure you get in before we wrap it up, Stacy?
No, thanks for having me on last minute. And thanks for having me at Hash Bash as well, Jamie. Speaking at Hash Bash was really integral to getting a lot of things moving. So I really appreciate the opportunity. But yeah, you guys can go to the website, which is www.cannabisworkersresource.com. It is meant for cannabis workers, those interested in the business. Yeah, if you go visit the site, there's a bunch of shit that you can learn. And yeah, I don't know, keep it crunchy, everybody.
Crunchy.
Well, we'll continue updates, and there'll be developments, and I think we'll have no choice but to keep it crunchy, at least under certain circumstances,
Whoa.
whatever that means. So, Anton, thanks for coming on. Came in about mid-show, jumped right in with us. It's always good to have you be a part of it. And anything you want to make sure you get in before we wrap it up?
Another good show, guys. I love being a part of the crew.
I always wish I had a couple more things in particular to get to, but when we just get rolling, sometimes we talk about some interesting stuff and important stuff sometimes as well. So, Adam, you want to?
No, I'm just fascinated by how this industry's where it's going, what's coming.
Good question. We have a lot of stuff that we know we're going to be getting some information on coming up here in the near future that will be interesting. But I appreciate everybody coming on. David left, but obviously appreciate him being on. And Stacy, again, thanks for coming on. And Rick, if you don't mind, wrap us up in the last few moments.
This is a wide-ranging conversation that covered a lot of different topics. And what that should impart to you, the viewer, is that this is such a multifaceted subject matter that none of us should be complacent in where we are. Everything is likely to change, and that you could be an agent of change if you get involved in something that you're passionate about. Veterans affairs, passionate about 280E, passionate about workers' rights. If you look at the people on this program, These people had passion and they went for it. You can do the same thing too. Make a big difference in this important time while we're forming laws for the future. Your children depend on it. Get involved. That's my message.
More the merrier. I agree. Another good one, Rick. Thank you very much. Let's treat cannabis as it is, not as it isn't. And we could probably avoid some of that stuff. But appreciate everybody again, and Jazz Cabbage Cafe, and we'll hit it again next week. See you guys.
See you guys.